Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you. And welcome to our new members as well. I'm Kayvon Stassen, Chair of the Awards and Facilities, or A&F Committee. Committee members include Committee Vice Chair Suresh Babu, Roger Beachy, who is online, Aaron Dominguez, Matthew Malkin, Julia Phillips, and Merlin Theodore. And welcome everyone to today's open committee meeting. We have two items on the agenda for the open meeting. First, the committee will discuss NSF's responses to comments on the draft request for proposal, or RFP, for the Antarctic Science and Engineering Support Contract. And then we'll vote on whether to forward a resolution related to this contract to the full board for consideration this week. We'll also hear a presentation from NSF on the agency's engagement with Indigenous communities. Materials associated with today's meeting are available in the A&F Committee Diligent Board Book, and the committee approved the minutes of the July 23rd open meeting by email, and these are also available in the board book. Okay. Am I not supposed to? All right. First item on the agenda is the discussion and vote on the provisional resolution related to the Antarctic Science and Engineering Support Contract. Today's discussion follows several updates the committee has received from NSF in open sessions. To quickly recap, in February of this year, A&F heard from NSF about the Antarctic Engineering and Science Support Contract acquisition and its strategic goal of enabling a world-class Antarctic science program with seamless integration between operations and research. At the July 2024 update, we heard that NSF had determined that an IDIQ, or indefinite delivery, indefinite quantity type contract, would be the vehicle for a request for proposals. It would also include a down select two-phased acquisition process. At that time, NSF confirmed that they expected robust participation from interested parties, that the IDIQ permits additional flexibility compared to the current contract, that past performance is a required criterion for down selection, and that they believe the contract ceiling is sufficient to meet the mission. The draft request for proposal, or RFP, was released on July 26th for public comment. The RFP was shared with the board, and board members asked questions and made comments. Last month, NSF provided responses to the over 300 comments or questions from the public, and including members of the National Science Board, on the sam.gov website. These responses were shared with the committee in November and are also available in the board book. And here I want to just add my sense, and I think I speak for Vice Chair Babu. Our understanding is that this is a process. This is a federal acquisition, contracting, and purchasing process. That process is guided by federal law and regulations. And our role, I think we see it, our role here is to monitor that process and to ensure that we are satisfied that that process has been correctly followed. And so with that framing and recap of where this has been up to now, I'd like to ask committee members if there are any outstanding questions as regards process before we proceed to consider the resolution. Julia.
Yeah, it came up in the various, thank you for to the powers that be for providing that detailed response to the comments and questions that were submitted with regard to the draft RFP. I guess one thing that concerns me a bit is that of the various criteria being considered, past performance is the bottom of the list of the criteria in terms of priority. And I don't know quite what that means, but I do find it a little concerning.
And I'm trying to remember how that was structured. Julia, do you remember when you say bottom? It sounds like you mean literally.
There were like end of the bullet list. 4 or 5 criteria, and they were, and from the responses to the questions and comments, they were it was clarified they were listed in priority order, and it was the last one.
Mhm.
And that's why I am a little concerned. I guess
Mhm.
there are obvious reasons. I don't need to go into detail about that, but
But I don't recall there being a quantitative.
it wasn't
what-
quantitative, but
right.
it was ranked.
Okay. Yeah, and I will say, I think from the standpoint of what we had communicated with NSF as regards this process, and on this point specifically, we were, I think, quite emphatic that we thought it would be appropriate and important that past performance be included, and
And I
they
believe,
included.
I believe some voices from Capitol Hill also indicated something to that effect.
Yeah. Other comments? My overall sense is that I think we can feel good and confident as a committee that that process was followed, that there was due diligence done. I mean, over 300 individual pieces of input from the community, including from us, each of which was duly responded to, dealt with, dispensed. And my own sense is that process and procedure have been followed here. Okay, so in the board book, you'll find a resolution that acknowledges the importance of the Antarctic Science and Engineering Support Contract to the U.S. Antarctic Program, and states the sense of the board that it is appropriate for NSF to continue the procurement process. And so I think we have the resolution to share on the screen, and it's there. Okay. Okay. Right. So the order of things here is that we entertain a motion, at which point it gets read, and then we vote. So we will now entertain a motion to recommend this resolution to the full board for consideration. Do I hear a motion?
So moved. Second.
We have moved and second. Staff will now read the resolution, please.
Whereas during the open sessions at the February 22nd, 2024 National Science Board meeting and the July 23rd, 2024 NSB Awards and Facilities Committee meeting, the National Science Foundation presented the agency's objectives, strategy, and timeline to recompete the Antarctic Science and Engineering Support Contract. Whereas the NSF budgets for and manages the United States Antarctic Program on behalf of the federal government pursuant to Presidential Memorandum 6646 of February 5th, 1982. Whereas the operations and logistics system enabled by the ASEC is critical to the success of the scientific mission and the health, morale, and safety of participants in the USAP. Whereas NSF described to the board that the competitive procurement process will result in a contract that will enable a world-class Antarctic science program with seamless integration between operations and research. Whereas NSF described to the board its plans to enhance the agency's oversight and enforcement of the contract, including enhanced accountability, and on the basis of the above publicly available information, resolved, it is the sense of the National Science Board that it is appropriate for NSF to engage in a competitive procurement process, which includes issuing a request for proposal in accordance with the Federal Acquisition Regulation, and to make a resultant award for services to support the USAP that is sufficient in scope and resources to achieve the presidential mandate and NSF's strategic goals.
Thank you, Jared. Any discussion? And again, hopefully it's clear that what this resolution is doing is recommending the continuation of the procurement process by issuing the RFP. The motion before the committee is to recommend the full board the resolution as read. Please remember that only ANF committee members should vote. Are we ready to record votes? All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
All opposed, say nay. Abstentions? Motion passes. Thank you. The full board will consider the resolution during the open plenary session at the board meeting this Thursday. Okay, we are moving apace. Okay, great. Nothing wrong with that. So our next agenda item is an information item. And since we have just a moment, Michelle, would you mind, for the benefit of committee members, including some of our new board members, the words information item have a meaning. What does that mean?
Yeah, an information item is something for the board's background and consideration. There's no expectation that you will, make a decision based on this information. It's information that supports the committee's, oversight responsibilities.
It's an FYI with opportunity for questions.
Exactly, and for general education. Yeah.
Thank you. And so joining us, we have Caroline Blanco and Luca Risi. Yes, oh, there you are right there. Thank you. We will now move to a presentation on NSF's engagement with Indigenous communities. And here to discuss and present, Caroline Blanco is Assistant General Counsel, and Luca Risi is Program Director in Astronomy. Thank you. This subject, and quite appropriately so, this subject was discussed in the ASTRO 2020 National Academy's Decadal Report, which recommended that the scientific community and local communities work together to define a model of engagement that advances scientific research while respecting, empowering, and benefiting local communities. And I will use my prerogative here to just share, having been a member of the ASTRO 2020 Decadal Steering Committee. This topic is obviously relevant to the U.S. Extremely Large Telescopes program considerations that are underway. Let's be very clear about that, and which we may learn more about with the pending USELT external panel report. But the ASTRO 2020 recommendation was directed more broadly to all astronomy projects that have local impacts on the ground that may be regarded as special or sacred to local or Indigenous communities. And that report, the Decadal Report, pointed to examples and lessons learned from the field of archaeology, for example. And so I'll hand over the floor now to Linnea Avalon, NSF's Chief Officer for Research Facilities, to introduce the presentation. Thank you, Linnea.
Yeah, thank you, Kayvon. So before I introduce our speakers, I'd like to give you a little bit of background and context on the Indigenous Community Engagement Framework and activities that Caroline and Luca will present to you. And I am really here on behalf of the director who feels very passionately about this, but couldn't be here to make introductory remarks himself. So Luca, you're controlling the slides?
Yes.
Could you go to the second slide? So there are 574 tribes in the United States, all of which have had an immeasurable influence on our national identity. From the Navajo and Tohono O'odham to the Iroquois, Ute, and Sioux. This country continues to be transformed by the culture and history of our Native communities. Tribal nations hold a vast wealth of knowledge, which continues to have an impact on every facet of our daily lives. Native American knowledge of medicine, astronomy, math, and engineering has helped to shape the scientific community into what it is today. Suspension bridges, topical pain relievers, mouthwash, and syringes all derive from Native American innovation. There's no doubt that our nation's greatest scientific achievements are enriched by the perspectives, knowledge, and achievements of Indigenous peoples. During Dr. Panchanathan's tenure, he's made it a priority for NSF to continue to build meaningful relationships with tribal nations and other Indigenous communities. In the slide in front of you, you see some images from some of these engagements. I won't talk about all of them, but I'll make reference to a few of the things that you see. From hosting town halls with tribal leaders to hearing directly how NSF can better engage, consult, and collaborate, to visiting the Daniel K. Inouye Solar Telescope in Hawaii, he has sought to ensure that our actions reflect respect, partnership, and a shared vision for progress. Let me give you a few examples of the relationship building that NSF has prioritized over the last few years. Some of the NSB members, Julia among them, participated in the inauguration of the Inouye Telescope. There, we had the privilege of seeing firsthand the importance of weaving together groundbreaking science with cultural understanding, working alongside the Native Hawaiian community to make this transformative observatory a reality. In Alaska, and that's the image in the upper row where everybody's in orange, the director announced NSF's $20 million GOR investment. This initiative, called the Interface of Change, exemplifies how Indigenous knowledge and scientific research can come together to address climate-driven challenges at the land-ocean interface. Through the NSF Innovative Technology Experiences for Students and Teachers program, or ITEST, Native American students at Oklahoma State University are building STEM skills while exploring cultural stories through VR and AR design projects. I've not gone through all the examples on the slide, but I hope you understand the importance we are placing on this type of outreach. In order for the STEM community to reflect the full talent that exists across the country, we need to greatly increase the number of American Indians, Alaska Natives, Native Hawaiians, and other Pacific Islanders in science, engineering, and technology. I'm really delighted to, again, introduce Caroline and Luca, and to tell you that I had the great privilege of accompanying them on an engagement in Hawaii in September, and to see really firsthand how this engagement process is making a difference. So I hope that you enjoy what they have to say, and I'm sure they would be happy to take your questions at the end. Caroline?
Thank you.
Thank you, Linnea. As Linnea mentioned, NSF has been engaged in several efforts to increase its outreach and engagement with Indigenous communities. One important effort has been the establishment by the director of the Tribal Consultation and Engagement Working Group, which I co-chair along with my colleague, Dr. Germelina Tupas. It was established in October of 2021 in response to the presidential memorandum to strengthen federal agencies' relationships with tribal nations. And as part of that effort, NSF's TCEWG, the working group, developed an action plan in 2021 to identify issues of concern to federally recognized tribes, known as tribal nations, regarding their relationship with NSF. And this was developed following numerous listening sessions, a lengthy comment period, and outreach to tribal nation leaders. And that action plan is updated annually. The working group also conducts outreach to NSF components, tribal nations, and other Indigenous communities. We also conduct training internally, and the working group is in the process of developing recommendations for an NSF tribal consultation policy and other proposed actions that are designed to strengthen NSF's relationships with tribal nations and other Indigenous communities. NSF also has a tribal liaison, and I serve as that tribal liaison. And in that capacity, I respond to questions and concerns raised both within NSF and externally. In addition, we have an informal group, an interest group that meets monthly, and it is called the Interest Group on Indigenous Communities. And that brings NSF staff together to talk about issues involving Indigenous communities, and presentations are given by internal and external experts. In addition, the Office of Polar Programs has their Arctic Community Engagement Program, and they have a website that was developed that really contains a lot of helpful information on a range of NSF programs, initiatives, external collaborations, and other resources that aim to facilitate effective and respectful engagement with local and Indigenous peoples in the Arctic. And there are many programs that they have involved with that, and it's been very successful. Next slide, please. So as part of I mentioned earlier that as part of our Tribal Consultation Engagement Working Group, we had several extensive efforts to engage with and listen to Indigenous communities, and this was focused on federally recognized tribes. And as part of those listening sessions, which we held about 6 of those, and we had an extensive comment period, there were really 2 main takeaways. One was Nothing About Us Without Us, which really focused on tribes' histories of being represented without their consent or even their involvement. And so representations were made about them that then were in publications that were put out in the public domain, and then others in the future cited those publications and so forth and so on. And the tribes did not have a role in being able to correct those representations. So that was one takeaway. The other was that increased engagement was needed. Many of the tribal nations didn't even know about NSF. They didn't know that we were a federal agency. And so, but they were very interested in learning more about what we had to do. So in response, the Tribal Consultation and Engagement Working Group engaged in significant outreach efforts. We increased our engagement with tribal nations and other Indigenous communities. And some of these photos, you could see there's a photo there that, that shows us engaging with a tribe in Montana and Washington State. We also visited, and we also reached out and participated in conferences that were primarily attended by Indigenous community leaders. And so this slide depicts several of the posters that were relevant to the conferences that our group attended. And this has really helped to increase awareness about NSF through those conferences. And one challenge that we face is there are 574 federally recognized tribes. So to meet with them individually is really a challenge. We do try to meet with them from time to time, but the conferences really do help to meet people in one-stop shopping in that sense. Next slide, please. So additional responses to what we heard, one thing was, again, addressing the nothing about us without us concept, is we added new language to our PAP guide, our policy document, that became effective on May 20th of this year. And in that change, we now require tribal nation approval when tribal nation interests or resources might be impacted. So there needs to be tribal nation approval that is sought. And if is there maybe a mute button needs to be on? Is it? I'll continue. Okay, thank you. But the 2 sentences, sure. The PAP guide language became effective on May 20th of this year. And this language is pretty important. It requires tribal nation approval when tribal nation interests or resources may be impacted. And this applies to proposers who want to seek NSF funding. So they have to at least make the request when they submit the proposal. And then NSF, if it comes to the point where they're considering funding it, that approval has to be part of the package. It has to be obtained, or a document from that tribal nation saying that no such approval is needed, or NSF will not fund it.
And just to be very clear, you're saying tribal nations there very specifically.
Tribal nations, and again, these are the federally
Yes.
recognized tribal nations. Yes, thank you. In addition, what we've done is we've engaged in a lot of training, both externally and internally. We've done training on the new PAPG language. We also have done internal training, 2 90-minute-long sessions for NSF employees, and also part of our Merit Review Basics training. We also initiated a new website that provides resources and funding opportunities and other information. The need to work with Indigenous communities is specifically recognized throughout NSF. And to describe one example is my colleague, Dr. Luca Rizzi, Program Director in the Division of Astronomical Sciences. Luca?
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you, everybody, for giving us this opportunity today. The context that Caroline shared with you today is vital for understanding our approach to outreach in Hawaii. Beyond this broader context, there's an important issue that we also must discuss, and that issue is how we conduct astronomical research in Hawaii. As you know, in 2021, the National Academies of Sciences released a decadal survey, a comprehensive roadmap for the future of astronomy. One of its key insights in the section about the state of the profession was the recognition that astronomy is deeply intertwined with the environment and the communities where it takes place. This is particularly true for land that holds profound significance for Indigenous people. Hawaii provides the most recent and prominent example of this interaction. The complex history of how Hawaii became the 50th state of the Union and the disenfranchisement of its native Hawaiian population have intensified the challenges surrounding the use of the Summit of Mauna Kea for astronomical research. These challenges highlight the need for a new approach, one that balances scientific discovery with respect for cultural heritage and community well-being. In this context, the ASTRO 2020 Decadal Survey made this important recommendation. The astronomy community should collaborate with experts from other fields, such as archaeology and social sciences, and representatives from local communities to establish a community astronomy model. This model should advance scientific research while respecting, empowering, and benefiting local communities. To achieve this vision, the astronomical community must embrace the following core values: listen and empower, prioritizing the voices and perspective of indigenous and local communities, aim to do good for all, ensuring that research and outreach create tangible benefits for everyone involved, invest in the future together, building sustainable collaborative relationships that honor both science and cultural stewardship. This calls for new frameworks that focus on creating genuine partnerships with indigenous community. Our goals should include creating mutually beneficial collaboration, establishing cultural supported pathways for indigenous individuals to enter and thrive within the astronomical profession, promoting true sustainability, including the preservation and restoration of sites that are both scientifically and culturally significant. By embracing this principle, we can chart a path that not only advances astronomy, but also fosters trust, respect, and shared purpose with the communities we engage with. It's essential to recognize that the issues surrounding astronomy in Hawaii are just one of the many significant, impactful issues facing the Hawaiian community. While the protest against the 30-meter telescope in 2019 brought attention to one aspect of these concerns, the Hawaiian community is grappling with several other pressing issues. Some of the issues are shown here in this picture. For example, the recovery from the devastating Lahaina fire that happened in Maui, which has left lasting scars in the affected community. The opposition to deep sea mining enterprises, raising concern about environmental preservation. Challenges to the use of land for military training, which impact both environment and community well-being. And the recent event related to the drinking water contamination on Oahu caused by fuel spill, with the possibility of endangering health and safety. In many ways, these issues share common threads. Hawaiian communities often feel they are fighting on multiple fronts simultaneously, working tirelessly to protect their land, culture, and future against various threats. To further clarify the context in which our outreach happens, it's also important to note that Hawaii is home to a remarkable array of organizations representing Native Hawaiian communities of practice. These organizations reflect the depth and diversity of Hawaiian culture, tradition, and expertise. Together, they form a vastly interconnected network that is actively working to meet the community needs, whether by preserving cultural heritage, advocating for environmental stewardship, or supporting educational and economic opportunities. What's particularly inspiring is how these organizations are stepping into the vital role of relationship building. They're fostering trust, creating dialogue, and bridging gaps between different stakeholders. This context is not just essential, it's foundational for any effort to engage with Hawaii in a meaningful and respectful way. By engaging and partnering with this organization, we have the opportunity to strengthen these relationships further, honor their leadership, and work towards outcome that benefits everyone. With this, back to Caroline, who's going to describe our most important initiative.
Thank you, Luca. The relationship building efforts that we've made in Hawaii have been pretty significant. It's been given a name by our Native Hawaiian contractor, and it's called Pilina, which refers to relationship building, association, connection, and naming is very important in the Hawaiian culture. So we took that to heart, and we've had 4 different trips, 4 different Pilinas as part of this. It started in December of last year. And it started with intentions. Everything always starts with the intention in Hawaii. And so our intention that we've communicated has been to better understand perspectives, establish and strengthen our relationships in Hawaii, and to initiate an ongoing dialogue with Indigenous researchers, key cultural practitioners, communities of practice, and grantees to inform recommendations regarding NSF policies, programming, and practices. And the way we build trust is by creating a climate of honesty and openness. The first trip, we started with a grounding and permission. And then we did things like learn scientific methods of the Indigenous communities of practice. We had meetings with core cultural practitioners. The second trip was in January of this year. And we again met with cultural practitioners, communities of practice, and also post-secondary institutions. Third trip was in May of this year, and it was a similar type. And these photographs are actually from those Pilinas. And the fourth one was in September that Linnea joined us on, and that was to visit post-secondary institutions, additional communities of practice, navigators, and Native Hawaiian trusts and organizations. We've been meeting with the inner circle of influential Native Hawaiian organizations. This includes current and future leaders in Hawaii and very prominent organizations. We've been given really unprecedented access to the inner core of Hawaiian communities, and also given access to their most advanced and cherished learning tools. We've listened, we've worked alongside them, we've practiced their culture. We have started the process of building credibility at NSF. The culmination of what we're referring to as the first phase of this effort was a workshop that took place just a couple of weeks ago, November 19th to the 21st. And the name given for that was Waiwahi, meaning to break down. It was an NSF-sponsored workshop creating a community-led discussion on topics of interest that surfaced during our Pilinas. And this include incorporation of Indigenous knowledge into research proposals. It it didn't focus as much on this, but it did touch on co-production, co-design of research and education curricula. It focused a lot on identifying cultural practitioners with community recognized expertise. So rather than NSF identifying who folks are with expertise, they helped to provide us with some information on how we could go forward and have those folks identified. Because frequently they may not have a PhD, but yet they're very expert and identified as experts within their communities. And this would include not just researchers, but folks who would serve as potential reviewers. We also talked about the protection of data sovereignty, intellectual property, which is very, very much a concern to them. And this workshop was supported by a variety of components of NSF, including EPSCoR, TIP, TCUP, et cetera, and also MPS. The impact on TMT's environmental review has been important. The Pilina initiative, although it is very separate from the environmental review process from TMT, the Pilina initiative was not designed at all to change positions that people may have on whether or not to go forward with TMT. But what it has done is, because of what we have learned through this process and the credibility that we have gained so far, it's really worked to try to build trust and credibility between the Native Hawaiian communities and NSF. And hopefully we'll have a positive influence on the quality of the environmental review that we conduct. And in fact, based on what we've learned, we have already decided to incorporate some of the Indigenous perspectives in our environmental review. And that should help present a broader picture of the cultural resource impacts, for example. The themes that we have come across in this effort, both in the Pilina effort and in general in the other respects that we have worked on through the Tribal Consultation and Engagement Working Group, really include incorporating Indigenous knowledge into research proposals, respect for data sovereignty, and really identifying expertise in ancestral knowledge and practice so that we can recognize reviewers who have that expertise, and those reviewers then can evaluate proposals in a way that others simply cannot. So those themes have really emerged from all of these efforts. In the road ahead, we realize this is a long process and relationship building efforts will need to continue if we are going to continue to build trust with Indigenous communities. And the Tribal Consultation Engagement Working Group will continue to find ways to respond to the themes that are surfaced in our engagements with folks. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. We have plenty of time for questions, and I imagine that there will be some real interest in delving a bit deeper. I'll get us started if you don't mind. Not all committee members might be as familiar as those of us in astronomy have become over the years with the specific and particular challenges that attend the Native Hawaiian community vis-a-vis the lack of recognition, the lack of federal recognition. I'll again, for the benefit of the non-astronomers on the committee, I'll give a counter example, right? NSF through the national, through its NOAR lab operates the Kitt Peak National Observatory, which is on the land of the Tohono O'odham Reservation. And there, right, it's very clear that any activities that we might want to conduct on that soil has to be negotiated as with any sovereign, any other sovereign entity, right? You're negotiating with the sovereign Tohono O'odham nation. There is no such thing as a sovereign nation of Native Hawaiians, right? And so I provide just that little bit of context to frame this question, which is, how have you, and I think we just saw toward the end of your presentation, some really innovative examples of how you can engage with the Native Hawaiian community in particular, where in some cases, you know, you have to do things by the book, as it were, right? There's a list of federally recognized nations. But you know, I saw a couple of innovative examples of how you can engage meaningfully with the Native Hawaiian community, working with and around those sort of differences and particularities. And so I wanted to invite you to maybe just say a little bit more about this idea of data sovereignty. And I'm sorry, would you mind going back to that slide that had
the last one?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Okay, no, the other ones actually, I thought you spoke to pretty clearly, but data sovereignty. Yeah, I mean, maybe just help us understand what that means. And it strikes me as an innovation. I'm sorry, I know what the second one was. You're talking about incorporating the Native Hawaiian community's perspectives into the environmental review. If you could talk about those two things.
Sure. Co-production, co-design would mean if you have something that you are interested in researching, you'd reach out to the community and discuss it with them. They may have ideas about it based on generations of Indigenous knowledge that they might want to bring to bear with it. And a project could be designed together. And that's part of what their interest is in as well. And an example of that is what we're looking at for the TMT environmental review. In an environmental impact statement, typically what you have is the descriptions of the affected environment. And then after that, you look at the proposed action and you look at the environmental consequences that could happen based on where the baseline, the affected environment is, and then the consequences on top of that. And so typically what we do with environmental impact statements is we will just have a study conducted and we'll say, based on Western science, contemporary science, we'll say, this is how we measure noise. This is how we measure landscape views and view sheds and all sorts of things, soil impacts, water impacts, et cetera. And what we have decided to do with this EIS is a little bit differently. So the Hawaiian perspective really looks at things a little more holistically. So the first thing we're doing is we are looking at developing study plans to say, this is what we intend to do. This is the methodology we intend to use. This is the scope of work of the study. And then we send those out for public comment. But before even doing that, our hope is to partner, and we're in negotiations now with working with a very prominent cultural practitioner to talk through what those studies might look like, and then to allow the public to comment on what that scope of work would look like and what the methodology would be. Once the studies are completed, then we would incorporate those into a document. And this may change based on the outcome of the studies, but for now, what we envision is to have, for example, one part talking about, let's say, water impacts, and we might talk about it in contemporary science ways. And then also in the same document, we'll have it talked, analyzed within the Indigenous perspective, from that perspective, so that the reader will be able to look at all of it and say, this is what is going on there. From what we've heard from talking with folks, that seems to be an approach that they would really welcome. It's very novel. It's not been done before. And those are the kinds of efforts that we're looking at. And in fact, just by having the workshop that we just completed, we were told by the head of the Office of Hawaiian Affairs that who participated and was very helpful in that workshop. He had said, nobody sits down with us and talks with us for this amount of time, to really dedicate that time to it. And we all thought that was really beneficial. I mean, we didn't come up with, here are our action items from the workshop, but we did come up with ways of proceeding forward. And that was very well received.
And that environmental impact statement or a study or review is underway?
We're at the study plan stage
study
where
plan.
we have a draft study plan and we're sharing it with that
Thank you.
Indigenous contractor. And so then they'll be able to comment on it. And in a few months, hopefully we'll have it out for public comment and we'll go from there. It's a lengthy process.
Thank you.
Mhm.
Committee member Roger Beachy has a question.
Thank you very much for the presentation and the discussion of this important topic. I have a couple of questions about how this initiative, the TCEWG, the working group, what the implications are for other facilities outside of the ones you're talking about today, the astronomical ones and so forth. For example, what about the NEON sites that we are funding? They're in the programs. And it must be on many tribal nations. When I was at USDA, NIFA had a program that was involved. I was pleased to see somebody from NIFA on your team. And how have you used that information that other agencies have engaged or have used or developed for tribal engagement or Native people's engagement? And lastly, what about facilities that we hold, that we share in other nations? For example, Chile and other countries where we have shared facilities. Thanks.
Okay. I think, well, first of all, I'll address the question about other facilities that we have, like such as NEON and other projects that we have. Our TCEWG efforts aren't just focused on one project or another. I mean, it really is looking at NSF as a whole. And so any projects that we are able to, hopefully our efforts, which are general in scope and not focused on any project really, will help all projects that we're involved with and all grants and proposals that involve tribal interests or resources. We also have on the environmental compliance side, we do engage with tribal nations if there are potential tribal impacts, if they are on tribal land, if there is some resource that might be involved or potentially impacted. So in addition to the potential PI having to seek the permission now under the new PAP guide language, permission to even go forward with this research, NSF has its own federal obligations that are grounded in federal environmental law. And so we have been doing that all along, and we've been reaching out. The TCEWG effort has really helped us to become more known in the tribal communities. And that really does help. And it also helps when we're engaging with tribal nations that they will see we're making efforts across the board. And so that helps to work on that trust and relationship building that we're working on so hard. In other nations, for example, in Chile and so forth, the TCEWG has really been focused on, our charge is really limited to tribal nations, both federally recognized, and within the last year, we expanded the scope to include non-federally recognized tribal nations, but still within the US. So we haven't expanded outside. We do try to exercise sensitivities when dealing with other nations as well. So we try to be cognizant of cultural impacts that would come to play.
Thank you. The last question had to do with other federal agencies. Is there a uniform or an attempt to uniformize across agencies?
Thank you for reminding me of your question. All federal agencies are under the same obligation, and they're affected by the executive orders that have been in place for a long time, and the recent presidential memorandum that put a greater focus on building those relationships. And so early on, what we did, there is the White House Office of Tribal Affairs, and they have helped provide some guidance, but really because every agency has its own mission, it's a different challenge. For example, when we at NSF, we look at, we're a funding agency, of course, and comparing to the National Park Service or the Bureau of Land Management or the National Forest Service, those are land-based agencies. So they have a whole different approach to it in terms of their needs. Our needs are a little bit different, and we are vast. We go all over the country, and it's not limited to just that particular land-based area and the tribes that might be impacted around them. So we do listen to them, and we try to learn what we can, and we have engaged with them from time to time. What we're finding recently is that other agencies are very interested in the new PAPG language that we came up with. They think that's very novel and a long time coming for some people. They've mentioned that. So those have been the interactions. There is no uniform policy, and you can imagine when the presidential memorandum first came out, and the requirement was to consult with all 574 federally recognized tribes, and within 90 days come up with an action plan. That was a challenge for both for NSF, all federal agencies, and for the tribal nations themselves. So we've tried to coordinate where we can see opportunities, but NSF is a little bit unusual in its mission compared to others.
Thanks.
If I can,
Yes,
maybe
please.
if I can just add something very quick. There is an office of Hawaiian relations within the Department of the Interior, and they have an office here in DC and one in Honolulu. And we have engaged with them. We have met with them a couple of times. We are aware of their effort of trying to coordinate among different agencies, and we're happy to participate as soon as this effort takes shape or in any form. So we have volunteer our interest to participate and offer our help. The Office of Hawaiian Affairs has also reminded us that would be the preferred way of interacting with them, and we support them in this desire for a more coordinated effort. So yeah, we remain open to this communication and listening to them.
Thank you. Committee member Julia Phillips has a question.
Yeah, thank you. I'm sure you're aware of the National Academy's study that basically blew up over the issue of co-production, and I don't know a lot of details. I can surmise some of them, but the question for you is, what learnings have you taken from that?
This is still an issue that we are seeking information about. In our efforts with the TCEWG and also with the PILINA effort, we're at the beginning stages, the infancy stages, so to speak. And so we haven't come up with any hard and fast proposals yet for how to proceed. And so the real important part of this is really to listen and to build that trust, build that relationship, because that's part of what was an underpinning of that article, as I recall.
Merlin Theodore has a question.
I have a question. I commend you for developing those relationships with those tribal nations as you continue to find ways to respond to themes that surface. And forgive me if I missed this. The 3 themes that you listed, was this based on a prioritized, reduced list? Are there other themes that maybe arise that is not listed here, but should be on the horizon for future themes that may surface?
We received quite a few comments, for example, in our public comment period and during our listening session, and we have kept track of those as well. These were the main themes that came out of things, out of the listening sessions and all the interactions that we have had. And those are the main focus of what we have, what we've experienced with these meetings and these relationship building efforts.
Thank you.
But there are others as well.
Great. So it's time for us to wrap up. If I might just ask one final question. This is really kind of an org chart question, I suppose. If we can use the example of astronomy, since we have an astronomy division representative here, General Counsel, CORF, what is the, sort of org chart relationship between sort of, the division level program directors, General Counsel, CORF, when it comes to thinking about these Indigenous community engagements? Is it, is CORF saying, this is a facilities matter, and so General Counsel help me out, or is it?
I'm not sure we've defined it that way, but I can say that Dr. Karen Marangel is who Dr. Germelina Tupas and I directly report to as co-chairs of the Tribal Consultation Engagement Working Group. And these are, as I said, overall arching issues for NSF, not project specific. And we have members in the working group. The Pilina effort, which has included Luca and other folks from different components of NSF, that is a looser structure. But when it comes to different projects, I mean, as tribal liaison, people will contact me directly. So that's pretty much how it's organized. And eventually, hopefully there'll be an Indigenous affairs structure of some sort.
Yeah, and I would just add that this is like many things at NSF, that people with common interests get together and work on them across the foundation. And the formal structure matters a lot less than that there's a group that has a common purpose.
Yeah, and the work we've done internally with the interest group on Indigenous communities and those folks, I mean, when we first started in 2021, people didn't know who had the expertise and, who did we talk with? And now we do. People know who to go to. And it's really pretty wonderful in that respect.
Maybe I'll ask it a bit more narrowly, and I'll direct the question to you, Linnea. Even if there's not a formal process, do you have a sense that for any up and coming, let's say large facilities project, is there a sequence of steps in your own mind, even if just informally, around number one, is there likely to be interaction with Indigenous local communities? If yes, here's what I do next. Here's what I do next.
I think that yes, to a point, but I think that falls under the structure that Caroline mentioned with the environmental compliance, right? That her team and the Office of General Counsel has worked very hard to develop a process that's accessible for program officers, whether it be for facilities or grants, so that they know what to be looking for from the outset. And her team is amazing. They are incredibly helpful at any stage of a project, just to reach out and ask a question about how to proceed.
Okay. So that environmental impacts sort of process is pretty important, it sounds like, for
Yes.
being an initial kind of whatever trigger or point of contact for this whole process. Yeah.
Exactly. It's a National Environmental Policy Act.
Yeah.
It's the National Historic Preservation Act and other tribal consultation policies. So federal law governs us there.
This was important and very helpful conversation. Thank you for taking the time to be with us. So this open ANF meeting is now adjourned at 2:55 Eastern Time, and we'll be on break for 5 minutes. Committee members, please return at 3.
Very nice. Very nice. Thank you for coming.